So let's go to actually talk about, this adaptation of the mythology for Kaldheim. So in Kaldheim, it's divided up into 10 realms and the World Tree. And then they've published the little story of the first saga, the origin story of Kaldheim. The world was first born from a seed, and that seed grew into the World Tree, and everything else grew from it. Its leaves were every color imaginable, as its branches spread out, they became worlds themselves. And once there were 10 strong branches, fruit grew on the branches, and those were the cosmos monsters. The serpent was the firstborn, and he has been growing since the beginning of time. So how does that stack up with the creation myths of our mythology?
The fact that you have the tree and you have a serpent matches fine. It tends not to be emphasized in the origin. The origin is usually takes place at the origin story. The Order Out of Chaos comes slightly different, but I don't have a real problem with it. It doesn't clash. They want to emphasize, Magic the Gathering wants to emphasize, because it just matches so well with parts of the whole Planeswalker mythos, that you have this connection between realms. That works fine.
Right. So the realms of Kaldheim are described as mini planes that are connected by the World Tree. So you don't actually have to planeswalk in order to travel between these 10 realms. There are connections between them that occur through the cosmos.
Right. And that's kind of like the bridge in
Yes.
Avengers, right?
Yeah, the Rainbow Bridge that shows up in the MCU. That comes out part one of the, or several of the stories. The Norse weren't as careful to make nice, clear ways of crossing between the realms. They actually had some stories where just hopping over the right creek will move you from one realm to another, but it only happens when the sun is right and on full moon or whatever it is, the connection between the realms is thin enough that you can step over. They also have other stories that end up echoed, like in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when you go work your way through the back of the wardrobe and you suddenly end up in a forest. That is very much the kind of story that shows up in Norse mythology, how somebody ends up in a different realm.
Just by accident.
Intentionally, right?
And sometimes it's the back of the wardrobe, and sometimes
it doesn't work because the parents are looking, and so it's closed. They don't bother making it. It's great for dramatic purposes. It'll happen when the storyteller needs it to happen, right?
I'm also starting to see the connection to Legend of Zelda as well. The World Tree being the great
like the Deku Tree.
Deku Tree, okay. Yeah, and the Lost Forest, just kind of getting lost,
Yeah, I wonder how many. I mean, big trees are kind of a trope on them. With like they just kind of are a trope. You see a lot of big trees in things. I don't know if that specifically started from this mythology or not.
It is an archetype that crosses more than just Norse. Yggdrasil, that has its own name in Norse, is well known enough that I think it's the archetype that's used in TV tropes, for example, but does show up. But it often has other things placed on it, like if it's so important that we have to nurture the world tree, otherwise everything dies. That's not really in Norse mythos, but gets used somewhere else. Or it shows up in Stephen King novels, and but I don't know. I haven't played Zelda enough compared to what you guys have, but you probably can see.
The Deku Tree, to me, seems less of like a connection between different worlds or the basis that like the world literally rests on, and more of just like a big tree that talks.
Well, having a giant tree is easily borrowed and used for other purposes. You can have everything happen on the tree, right? I mean, that could be the world. The tree is one world as opposed to crossing worlds.
Right. So in this in the first saga, The Origin of Kaldheim, it specifies that the tree has 10 branches, but it's also mentioned that there are more realms besides these 10. That for some reason, like they reference lost
realms,
like lost realms of Kaldheim.
They probably just want the freedom to
Right.
add
The
realms if they
10
wanted to.
obviously makes the most sense with Magic because each realm is tied, not exclusively to, but is tied to a 2-color pair for drafting and to a tribe. So we can go through the 10 realms if we want.
And so I wanted to point out Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's even a tree.
That it definitely is one. Yeah, they're in the forest. It's several trees, but each tree leads to a different realm.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's super similar. And supposedly that, like, isn't there one of those trees? One of the trees even, like, has a pumpkin on it, too. So he's, like, left Halloween Town when he's even in that forest, and that forest is somehow between all the realms, too, and not just in Halloween Town, right?
You're right. Yeah.
Actually, I don't remember if there specifically is
I
one
mean,
of
he must be in Halloween.
Oh, that's how
Town,
the movie starts. It shows all the trees, and it goes into the pumpkin tree, and that's how the movie starts.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. Interesting. Okay, so the 10 realms that actually show up in Kaldheim. So there's Axgard, which is the first one alphabetically. I guess we'll start. But Axgard is where the dwarves live. So it's associated with the colors red and white.
And literally the name guard is the word we used from garden and also yard. So it's just the place of axes or the garden of axes. And axe obviously is well associated with dwarves as being their primary weapon kind of in the stories, right?
Yeah, I feel like it's a bit of a play on words, but also totally makes sense.
Bredegard is the realm of the humans and is tied mechanically to like green and white and humans in the set, but all the Vikings of all the colors live on Bredegard. That is just the place where the humans live, but mechanically in the game it's mostly tied to green and white.
And Breta probably is connected to the word brother. So it's the Garden of Brothers, or the place where brothers live, implying the humans are, as much as they may be separated in different tribes, there's something in common with them all.
Right. Next is Notvold, which is associated with green, red, and the trolls. Trolls
do show up prominently in Norse mythology, and yet they also are part of Magic the Gathering, right? And the knot, they spell it with a G. To bind, it's a something tied, but it's also like a knot in a tree, where it's a very hard swirling thing that
sturdy
and not bold. Bold is a fold of earth that becomes a rampart. So it's a stronghold it's their home, not fortress, but stronghold that they retreat to. And also trolls are much like the stories of them turning to stone or whatever. These have a particular and this is unique to Kaldheim. I don't think it's part of Norse mythology, but the with the trolls just staying so still and they occasionally waken up properly, but they're giants that...
Yeah, I usually see that more of like there's giants in like Lord of the Rings that look like they're part of the mountains. The
storm giants that have the battle.
Oh, speaking of which, there are trolls in The Hobbit, and they turn to stone, right? Is that a thing that Tolkien came up with for
Tolkien
trolls?
Borrowed all these from Anglo-Saxon myths, which are related to the Norse. His language that he was using, that his specialty does connect to the people that were living in England at the time that were worshipping pagans. Very little of their myths came through, but the stories of brownies and trolls and the like came through. There is some things that lasted, but it got refurbished after the Vikings conquered half of England in the 10th, 11th century there.
Okay. Well, we're going to go through all these realms again and look at cards that represent some of these concepts. So we can move on and always come back to it. Next is Immersturm, which is associated with black, red, and demons.
Yes. Immersturm is German for ever storming or eternal chaos, which is a great place for demons to come from, right?
Anyway, the next of the 10 realms is Istfell, which is associated with white, blue, and spirits. Istfell actually has a specific location on the world tree. Most of the other ones just kind of wander around on its branches. But Istfell is located underneath the roots of the world tree. And
the spirits Magic usually has them black and white, don't they? Is that
they're blue and white in Innistrad.
Okay.
But they've been like ghosts, just general spooky ghosts are black.
And
but they've been black, blue, and white.
Ist is the word comes Gast or ghost, and Fell means mountain. So it's Ghost Mountain. What's interesting, and the Norse have plenty of ghosts in their stories, and they tend to live in hell with a single L, named after the goddess of the dead, which was portrayed in the Thor Ragnarok movie, right? Was hell, but usually the roots of the world tree have a different stories about them, because that's where the dragon is gnawing on the roots, and people have to.
Which dragon?
It's
dragon? Is there only one?
There's
dragon?
more than one dragon. There is a dragon gnawing on the roots, and poison is a typical weapon of dragons, and trying to poison the tree, and they have to keep him from that. Likewise, between the roots is also where these wells of water are, with watering the roots of the tree, and the wells of water are associated with wisdom and with the fates, the goddesses that can look at and do divination of what things are coming in the future through the well. And there's the reason why Odin has one eye is associated with them, but we can come up with that later.
Yeah, we'll cover all the gods.
So the roots have a different meaning
later
than Kaldheim, but I don't have any problem with the association of the realm of ghosts being under the ground that the tree is on. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, Kaldheim treats ghosts and zombies differently, and they're in different places for different reasons, but we'll cover that. Next is Karfell, which is blue, black, and zombies. But it's not hell.
No.
It's there's a reason why there's zombies there, but zombies don't go there when they die. It's we'll cover more specific.
Yeah, I don't know. Usually, if you will, there's a soul and the body, and then you separate the soul and you have a ghost, and the body that's left can be occupied by something else that isn't a normal soul, and they're reusing that empty vessel. That comes up in a lot of mythology. And Karfell, the Kar is a vessel of a man that's. I could totally see that being part of the reason why they chose that name, but Kar is related to like the name Carl is just a man, a fellow, somebody. It's a person, and so they have the semblance of a human, right? Because it's the body still, but
yeah, right.
Yeah, and what?
Lots of zombies on Karfell, but it's not a place that
and what
people
color?
go when they die. It's just a realm of dead. It's blue and black. A lot like Innistrad, honestly. The blue-black zombies, the blue-white spirits, and the green-white
I'm seeing
humans.
a lot of similarities with Innistrad in terms of creature types and what colors they are in the color palette.
No vampires, though.
Or
werewolves.
But Innistrad changed a lot of things, because zombies were never blue. Like Drew mentioned, spirits typically weren't blue.
Before Innistrad, sure.
Before Innistrad. So they changed a lot.
And there were a lot of spirits in the Japanese block there.
Yes, right. Well,
all colors.
I guess, yeah.
We don't speak of.
But that was when I enjoyed.
It'd be a lot.
Yeah, I liked it too.
There's a lot of information about Karfell we can get to when we talk about it. It's pretty interesting, but we'll leave it there for now. Litiara is green, blue, and associated with the shapeshifters, the changelings. Lots of information, story-wise, or just lore-wise, about the changelings too, that they've published so far.
Okay, yeah, I was kind of wondering why. Like, man, there's all this shapeshifter tribal.
Yeah. Well, when you're trying to fit 10, or when you have like 10 different tribes that like you're sort of supporting, like not really all of them have lords or really a draft archetype built around them, but the changelings fit in really well when you have a set you're trying to draft with different tribal
definitely
synergies. And changelings,
I wasn't surprised by changelings. I was surprised by the shapeshifter support, because they're already all creature types. Changelings work with so many cards already to give them their own thing. It's really cool. Don't get me wrong. It just feels a little off balance, and not necessarily power lives.
there is a mythological reasoning for having changelings in Kaldheim,
which I was surprised at, because when I first thought about changelings wasn't obvious to me as being something in Norse, and looking at the Norse mythos Wikipedia page, for example, doesn't make it obvious. But once I switched to, was it the Swedish Wikipedia page on Norse, and then translated into English, it shows up a lot more than I expected. Usually, we think of changelings as being able to change into anything, right? Which I suppose is mechanically what it is. But
well, I don't expect them to change into a refrigerator, but they can change into living things.
And they certainly do mechanically. If you have protection from the gods, well, for example, a changeling is a god, and it's also a squirrel. But if you have protection from, you've got protection from changelings, right? But it shows up in Norse a bit more like werewolf, a man that can turn into a wolf. You have this other form that you can change into. That happens a lot in Norse. So, and it also happens with items. So there's a cloak of feathers that somebody uses to change into their hawk form all the time, and she can lend out that cloak of feathers, and so others can change into the hawk form. There's a lot of that, more of that than was obvious. And also were-bears, I think, is a bit more common in Norse than were-wolves for whatever reason. And that even shows up in, like, Lord of the Rings. There's a whole storyline that I think kind of got cut from the movies, but there's a were-bear, if you will, story in there, echoed in Anglo-Saxon. And Lit Jara is... Lit is light or fire, and Jara is fight or a struggle. So it's the struggle against the light or with the light or for light. I'm not sure which, but it wasn't clear if there was a story coming out of there. But Lit Jara certainly seemed to me the oddest word that was in that list.
The next plane, Skemfar, is the green-black plane of
green and black
elves.
are traditional elf colors for a while now, right? Yes. I don't know when the first black elf showed up, but
Lorwyn.
That was Lorwyn, yeah. But yeah, that's another one where they're staying consistent with the colors.
Yeah, we just had green-black elves in Commander Legends too. Though those were literally depicting the green-black elves of Lorwyn on those cards for the most part.
Yeah, I know we haven't gotten to it, but the frost giants are the only one. The giants in the set are the only ones breaking off that, where giants were in Lorwyn, red and white.
Dwarves, have they been white very long? I see
what you mean. Yeah, since Kaladesh had a lot of white dwarves.
Whereas
I think they were primarily white in Kaladesh.
Yeah, and they were never as strong a red color as goblins were the red critter. And
early on there were dwarves, orcs, and goblins, and like early magic. But dwarves
they were all kind of competing for space. Dwarves just kind of dropped out for some reason.
They tried to make a comeback in Odyssey, but they didn't really stick around for that.
So Skemfar is Skem probably is related to the word skin, but it's also the word for hide or bark. It's the shell that holds them, and far for father. And elves in the story, I believe, claim descent from gods. They're in a sense the inheritors.
Yeah, right. We haven't talked about the different, how the gods differ yet. But the elves consider themselves, or are descendants of the Ainir, which are the old gods, or the gods that predated the current gods that the current gods overthrew. And they got their power from the world serpent. So Skem coming from skin makes a lot of sense because snakes have a lot of association with shedding skin.
Yes, and Skem does associate with things that shed,
so
like bark.
If they're the people of the snake, then although the Skemfar, the history that they've made for these green-black elves is totally different from the Lorwyn elves. And I'm really excited to talk about them because they got a lot of cool story and history made about them. It makes them feel a lot different from the Lorwyn elves, even though technically it's just more green-black elves.
Oh, yeah. So on the surface, they seem exactly the same.
They came up with a lot of ways to make them feel very different from... Although, when they made the Lorwyn elves, they came up with a lot of good reasons why they are black, because we didn't see a lot of black elves, but then they were very xenophobic and prideful, which I guess made them green and black. And these elves kind of are taken a different way, which is cool. The next planet is Starnheim, which is white black angels
or Valkyries.
Yeah, the Valkyries.
And Starnheim is star home, and it also has a unique place in the tree, right?
Yeah, it sits on top of the world tree, and it's like it's covered by a big lake, and like underneath the lake, through it, you can see the top of the branches of the world tree. And then really the hall of the, not the hall of the gods. What's the, I can't think of the actual hall on Starnheim. That's actually in this little picture, the light. Starnheim's depicted as like a little twinkle that you see off in the distance in a lot of other artwork. If you ever see kind of like what's in the middle of this picture of the world tree, except usually it's at the top of the world tree. There's like a twinkle. That twinkle is Starnheim.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and it would be as of angels to live in the highest
and Valkyries
place
is one of those
possible.
things out of Norse mythos. You may not know much, but people kind of know something about Valkyries. They show up enough. But and Ride of the Valkyries is a prominent theme of music that gets most people have heard. They are literally the choosers of the dead or the slain. They will go to a battlefield and select among the dead and bring those that are worthy to Valhalla, and those who are unworthy fall to hell. And that part is known, although when it was a reminder rereading this stuff. Actually, the Valkyries split the dead, the worthy dead among some went to Valhalla, which is Odin's hall, and some were brought to Freya. And I've forgotten that, but I used to know it once upon a time. But the fact that not all of the worthy dead went to Odin, but some went elsewhere was
so they were split up into three distinct afterlives?
Well, no, the unworthy went to hell.
Okay.
But those that were worthy enough could go to one of two places. Kind of a little bit of the sorting hat thing going on.
Okay.
And it wouldn't be surprising if the gods showed up in Norse mythology at slightly different times, and there is two different sets of gods, kind of an older god and younger gods a little bit, and then they kind of merged. There was a hint of a war between the gods, and then the ones that ended up surviving that all kind of got together and were chummy. Fine, everything was forgiven. Not sure how that happens in history because the rough edges got smoothed off, but it hints at once upon a time they were very much followers probably clashed, and that echoes with the story of the elves, but it doesn't match up quite. It's sort of squeezed to fit a bit more than some things, but it works fine for
yeah. I think compared to like a lot of what they had to do for the Greek mythology on Theros, they have a lot more leeway to do what they want with. There's just fewer expectations. Like they still have the different realms, and they have a pantheon of gods, and they have a tree, right? But like the actual different realms that exist, they get to kind of do. It's not quite as strongly tied to what.
I think that's perfect. It works really well. They can make them do what they need to here, so that I don't see this as a problem at all.
Right. So in Kaldheim, the Valkyries descend from Starnheim on the dead, and they're either separated. The worthy go to Starnheim and have a party in the big hall, and the unworthy go to the Istfell, which is they become a spirit trapped there. They don't go to Karfell, which is full of zombies. They become a spirit and go to Istfell.
Right. I'm seeing a lot of comparisons to Ravnica,
sure, because
they're separate worlds with different guilds, and also like we spoke in Innistrad, and I feel like there's they are really starting to pull from past sets, like wherever they can. Like it's a much smaller thing. They're not putting so much emphasis on the fact that they have 10 worlds as much as Ravnica. But it's subtle. But
the big differences
we have these 10 worlds.
These 10 realms are not evenly distributed throughout the set at all. There's about 3 trolls total, right?
Ooh,
because Bredegard contains all the colors, and all of the Vikings come from Bredegard. So like half of the whole set is literally Bredegard, and then like all the zombies are technically from Karfell, right? So that's kind of a big chunk too, and all the elves are from Skemfar. But like Notvold and Immersturm don't get a lot of representation themselves, especially since a lot of the demons of Immersturm are actually associated with one of the factions of Vikings, so it gets really muddled. which isn't necessarily bad because we've had sets like Shards of Alara where every single card had a watermark, right? And you knew exactly what mini plane that was from, and then they all got merged together. There's so much intermingling between all of these, like they did not stick to that at all. And like you can see that on Innistrad with the factions, it's really you can identify almost every creature to what specific faction they're from. Where in Kaldheim, you'll see an angel who's obviously from Starnheim, but it's a snow angel. But there's not really snow on Starnheim, but like snow itself isn't a specific realm either. Karfell is obviously covered in snow, but then large parts of Bredegard and the mountains and forests are snow too. So is it an angel that like hangs out around the warriors on Bredegard in the snow, or like stalks people on Karfell? It's not really obvious where all the snow stuff fits in. Litiara is a lot of snow stuff too. Yeah. So there's a ton of cross contamination between the realms.
So mechanically, you're kind of saying, you're also saying characters from a certain realm could primary another realm.
Right.
Like, that's where they live.
Even all the dwarves, it's hard to tell where the dwarves are from, because there's a faction of dwarves that left Axgard. The red dwarf... They're like outlaws, and they just kind of were fed up. They had a fight with like the king of Axgard or whatever, and just left, right? So like, if you see a dwarf card, it's not necessarily from Axgard either.
Yeah.
And these realms, like, you don't have to be a planeswalker to travel between them, but, like, traveling to a specific one that you're trying to go to is difficult. Sometimes you just stumble into one you weren't really trying to go to. The next slide is all about how to travel between the realms. But we still have one more realm to talk about, Surtland, which is the blue-red land of giants.
Yeah.
Yeah, the giants are cool.
We brought up the giants.
Yes.
The red giants are fire giants, and the blue giants are frost giants. And it's cool seeing both of that on one plane. The giants are so cool in the set.
There's one difference. In Norse mythology had a plane of fire and a plane of ice, and there's a gap between the two, and where they came closest to touching was the realm of steam, and that's where life was spawned, right between the two. Of course, Scandinavia is well known for being snow-covered, and especially in winter with the midnight sun and all that. But it's also a land, Iceland in particular, a land of volcanoes, and
like to mess up air travel.
Fires. They've had their fire giants show up in Norse mythology plenty, and Surtur, who shows up in the Thor movie, is
a giant.
Is actually the king of the giants or god of the giants, and Surtland echoes that, but Surt just as a word means sour, bad-tempered, which you can certainly attribute to the giants, right? They're all bad-tempered, so it's a land of the grumpy.
The grumpy. No, the dwarves are from Axgard, along with the sleepy, the dopey, the happy. So how well do these 10 realms echo? There's generally considered to be 9 realms from Norse mythology, right?
Yeah, and so
Midgard, Asgard,
Jotunheim. Yeah, well, I think that Midgard echoes Bredegard very well, the land of the humans. So that's not a problem. The fact that they put both the fire and ice on one realm instead of keeping them separate, or not, I don't think the Norse were anywhere near as careful about making sure that it was distinct and had nice little lines. They fudged things all over the place. So in that sense, I don't think any Norse would be happy to argue that the Valkyries don't have their own realm. They fly between the realms, kind of thing. But I don't think that there's a real clash. This doesn't really bother me.
I know, at least in the Marvel comics, there is a realm for the elves have their own, generally considered to have one. But like, are there dwarves much in Norse mythology? Because that's not really something I associate with that.
Well, let me. There is a realm of elves, and that shows up. I think even was it the Dark World, right? Thor the Dark World. But in terms of dwarves, no, the dwarves are well known for being the craftsmen that create items.
Oh yeah,
right. The space dwarf that Peter Dinklage there. That I don't know that they had their own realm, but they certainly are prominent. And in fact, the whole Siegfried story, which we haven't touched on, that's one of those myths that shows up stronger in German than it does in Norway, that Wagner wrote his whole cycle of operas around, was a dwarf that crafted a ring, just like the Lord of the Rings. It had great power, but it perverted things so much that turned him into a greedy dragon that then the brave knight had to go and fight the dragon. That's all part of the opera, with the fat lady that sings at the end. That works fine with having the dwarves being so dwarves are prominent, trolls are fine, ghosts and are fine, shape changers. I'm not sure so much about zombies. It's not exactly a common thing. Valkyries and elves and giants, those work. The notion in the difference between man and God was a lot blurrier in Norse mythology, so that there's a whole spectrum, and that in fact there were humans that became gods in Norse mythology, and we haven't touched on it. The gods themselves in Norse are mortal and will die, and do die, which is so counter to Greek mythology kind of thing. And the range in between, that in a sense the giants and other they're Jotun, these people, they're not quite human anymore, but they're not quite God. They're somewhere on that spectrum.
Well, we'll get to that.
Right, and then there are things that fall outside of the realm. They're so gone. They're no longer human-like, and those are the monsters. They're true beasts, and we'll get to that soon too. But yeah, it isn't as clear just as a spectrum. Some gods are much stronger than other gods, right? So therefore, they must be farther along that god spectrum, and they don't bother making it clear. And just like there are stories that try to rationalize it after the fact, that's one of the things that Magic the Gathering will polish off the edges and say, well, here's what the gods in Kaldheim have to drink their potion, whatever that is, right?
So the one thing you'll see on these 10 realms is there isn't a realm of the gods, which the story references the gods' realm, but I wasn't clear whether or not that's like part of the world tree and technically exists outside of the other 10 realms, or if it's an 11th realm. But technically the gods currently, at the time of the storyline, live in Istfell, because they're all moved from the gods' realm, but it's hard to tell where the gods' realm was. That wasn't clear to me in the things I read. But then its history also mentions realms that previously existed that somehow are no longer connected to the world tree, which...
That could be a thing, yeah. And it sounds like another thing they can add on to later.
Yeah, it literally references one of the Planeswalkers guides. It says there's other realms outside the 10 in Kaldheim, but it's not yet time for their story. So I guess if we ever revisit, we're going to get a handful of new realms, I'm guessing, to mix things up. Okay, so the space between realms is the cosmos. And I guess that's also literally where the world tree is.
Okay.
And anyone can kind of luck into crossing the cosmos and go from one realm to the other, but it's kind of hard to do it on purpose, specifically knowing where you're going, unless you're one of the handful of exceptions.
Well, like, Planeswalkers have a lot of control, don't they?
Well, once they're on... In the story I've gone through so far, once they're on Kaldheim, they're kind of... They can Planeswalk to Kaldheim. I think they came to Bredegard first, but then they're kind of stuck there, and they have to navigate just like anyone else does. Specifically, Kaya and Nico both have to find people who can help them travel around.
Yeah.
So there's omen paths. So they're like pathways, and that's something that can occur naturally, and then you just get to walk through it, and you get to be in a different realm, right? There's a handful of ways to create your own paths if you're powerful enough, or if you have a powerful enough artifact that can do it. And you see here in my slide, we have the one of the story spotlight cards, Open the Omen Path, which has Tybalt holding a sword going through a pathway between two realms. The realm sword that he's holding can just create omen paths, and if you have it, you can just travel through all the realms of Kaldheim.
Okay, so he can...
Yeah, omen paths opening...
Foreshadow?
They kind of foretell an event called a Doomscar, which is another story spotlight card. So in Kaldheim, a Doomscar is when two of the planes collide and start to overlap. And it's usually very violent and causes a lot of destruction. And then it creates a lot of free reign for the denizens of the two realms to cross.
Got you.
And the
card right where the seam is. So kind of like, if you were thinking of like plates, and the land kind of overlaps each other, but there's a lot of violent instead of just them overlapping. It's like
it's not pleasant generally, is what it seems to be.
Right, but it doesn't affect the whole realm. It just affects the seams of the realm.
So usually, from what I was reading, Doomscars are from two planes. Specifically, but the card Doomscar kind of mentions in its flavor text. The whole story isn't published yet, so there's only so much I know about the story spotlight cards. But it seems to be all of the realms at one time colliding together.
Okay.
And we know Tybalt is opening a bunch of omen paths to cross between the realms to cause different factions to fight. And then it seems like if he opens enough omen paths between all the realms, he specifically can cause all the realms to kind of collide. So that kind of seems to be his plan, but the whole story is not published at this time.
It's clear in the Norse mythology that there's multiple ways to cross between realms, and that a mere mortal can have it happen by accident. Therefore, the fact that you have an open path that's open there that they stumble across makes perfect sense. In terms of mythos, there are multiple realms. I think, to some extent, we've talked about the spark the planeswalkers have and how difficult it is for someone, not just anybody can be a planeswalker. But here you've got a place where, because of the tree, the connecting these realms, it happens under different rules than the rest of all the planes, right? Planeswalkers can't move between the realms as easily as they want, and yet some people are good at it and can cross it at whim, and that you have this notion of a crashing between the realms is kind of cool. There is it hints at the great crashing to come, and that's one area that the Norse mythology I haven't mentioned about. There's a special magic that, and some gods are much better at than others, that deals with foretelling the future. And the whole notion of fates, and it's not so much foretelling the future, but narrowing the possibilities. You've eliminated the really crazy things and know what's most likely to come, and that wisdom of foretelling shows up in lots of stories. It's very important to several of the gods. The whole, I'm sure that the priesthood of the Norse pagans claimed it something themselves, that they could help foretell what was going to happen, and it gave them power among the tribes. That's all, very strong part of the whole culture, I think. So I like how that is echoed.
One thing about the ability foretell, I don't know how that exists in it, is related to something that is connected to the Cosmos monsters and the story of the Odin figure in Kaldheim. All that is kind of connected with how the Cosmos monsters work, which we'll get to.
Well, the best known story in Norse got the name Ragnarok, which gets used up quite often. People will know that word even if they know nothing else about Norse mythos. It is the ultimate battle at the end, and because of the foretell, everybody knows it's coming. They know it will happen. It's caused by the monsters fighting the gods, and at the end, the gods all die. The important point is they're fighting because this may not be the end. If this fight we win, okay, this wasn't Ragnarok. The Ragnarok is the one where we actually lose. So they have to honorably continue fighting. You can't give up. That's an important part of the Norse warrior society. They may die, but they're not they never give up. They don't surrender. They keep fighting. That's echoed in this. It's a kind of magic. I've forgotten. There's a special name that's a Norse word for that kind of magic, and some are better at it than others, and that's the whole purpose. Odin was one in particular who really wanted to know more about the future, sacrificed his eye so that he could have more of this magic, having looked in the well of the futures and understanding what narrows things down and being able to better know what's actually going to happen next, which is also a kind of cool way of handling, it's always a problem in storytelling if somebody really knows what's going to happen next. There's no surprises.
The Doomscars are one thing that
but here
the oracles and stuff try to foretell. It's not like a complete cataclysmic ending of the realms. It's just like something bad that they want to know when it's going to happen.
Yeah, so they can try to prevent it.
So it's not quite as extreme, but it definitely seems to be the Ragnarok replacement in Kaldheim.
Yes, because I think in the story we were given hints that Tybalt's grand plan might have to do something with a Doomscar that's bigger than all the others, funny. Because it will somehow give him more power. They
try to foretell the Doomscars the way we try to foretell like solar flares, because
or volcanoes, right? I mean, the more you know about that volcano or earthquake, you want to know.
So the gods are immune to the disorienting effects of the cosmos that occurs when you cross between realms. They can open omen paths. This says in rare cases they can transport themselves directly between the realms. But in one of the stories, Alrind, he just kind of makes a door appear and then like just leaves. He just dips out. So I don't know if he was literally using an artifact to make that omen path, or if he's just powerful enough to do that.
That was in the cinematic, right? That's what you're referring to?
It might have been. I actually don't remember specifically. That was part of Kaya's story.
Yeah.
The first, I think it was the first or the second part of that.
Gotcha.
The shapeshifters, the changelings, they can just make their own passages too. It's not explained how they do that. They just can. One way they get to intermingle with all the different races is that they can just go wherever they want, I guess.
That's interesting. So not only can they shapeshift into whatever they want, they
just get the planeswalk as much as they want. Yeah.
That's interesting. That seems good.
Which is because they have their own realm, like where they're from and stuff, and they just get to go places, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
The blue faction of Vikings are called the Omen Seekers, and they have special boats that they can sail to the other realms.
Okay. So yeah, it's not necessarily just stumbling upon. Like people have figured out ways, their own ways to be able to travel.
In the stories that have been published that I've read so far, Kaya and Nico both separately come to Kaldheim at different times, and they both end up on special boats to just travel to the places where they've been told that they're supposed to go to find what they're looking for. They both end up on boats. And the Cosmos monsters themselves also can escape to the other realms as they're moving around. It seems like the first saga suggested that there's 10 Cosmos monsters, but there's not nearly that many that are represented in the story and in the cards.
Okay. So there's not many cards representing them. I was going to ask, what are the... I don't even know which cards those are.
Yeah, I think there's 3 that actually have cards, and there's a couple more that are referenced.
Is like the Realm Eater one of them?
In the story.
Or...
Yep, that's one of them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So they get to go between the realms too. Though they also seem to live in the cosmos, I guess. And one thing to mention is the cosmos itself is different than the Blind Eternities, which is what is the space between the planes of most Magic sets.
Sure.
The cosmos kind of represents that, but it's only within these 10 realms. These